Did your family have favorites? If so, were you the favorite or someone else?
Mom texted me less than an hour before the family dinner, not to ask if I was on my way or whether I needed anything, but to drop a line that felt like a command disguised as concern, telling me not to ruin his big news tonight. And I stared at those words for a long moment because they did not sound like a mother trying to keep the peace. They sounded like a referee who had already picked a side and wanted me to sit quietly in the stands while the game played out the way it had been scripted. I told her I would not ruin anything, and technically that was true, because I had already learned the hard way that you do not win arguments with this family by raising your voice or by being the one who says the uncomfortable thing at the loudest possible time. You win by knowing the facts, keeping your composure, and letting people show you exactly who they are when they think the room belongs to them. I drove to the restaurant repeating that line to myself like a boundary I could actually keep, because I did not want a scene. I did not want to be the punchline in another round of group texts where I am framed as dramatic or jealous or difficult. And I definitely did not want to be used as the reason his night went sideways, since we all knew the night was set up like a little stage for him, with the manager ready to bring out a cheesecake, and the phones charged for photos, and the speeches already rehearsed in the car. On the way in, I passed my sister, who asked if I would behave and smiled like she already knew the answer she wanted, and I said I would be fine. Which is the kind of answer you give when you are tired of defending your sanity to people who only find you reasonable when you agree to be quiet. Then I took a seat near the end of the table, close enough to hear everything and far enough not to be trapped between him and Mom if they decided to make me the topic while pretending to talk about the weather. Daniel raised his glass and did the usual thing where the words are smooth and the eye contact is generous and everyone is supposed to feel lucky to be included, and I watched Emily watching him. Because she has that calm expression that could pass for trust if you do not know her, but if you do, you see the questions sitting just behind it. And I wondered whether she had decided to ask them tonight or keep them for later when the kitchen is closed and the shoes are off and the ring is sitting in a dish by the sink. Mom kept checking me like I was a smoke alarm that might start beeping without warning, and I kept my hands under the table and my mouth shut because I understood what was happening here. That the story of the evening had already been assigned its heroes and its villains, and my job was to nod and smile and clap at the right times so the photos would look harmonious and the caption on the family thread would say what it always says about him. That he is doing amazing and that we are all so proud. The thing people forget when they ask you to be silent is that silence does not erase the truth, it only moves it to a different room, and I had already been in that room with my own questions and my own evidence, which I did not wave around or throw in anyone's face. Because the point was not to humiliate anyone, the point was to make sure the person who deserved to know actually knew, and to make sure I could live with myself when the dust settled and the cameras were packed away. So I smiled when the servers brought the dessert with the sparkler and the table leaned in to cheer, and I noticed how Daniel looked taller in moments like this, and how Mom grew softer whenever he stood up to talk. And I kept thinking about how many times I had played the role of the good sport, and how many times that had turned into free cover for someone else's mess, and I decided I was done being the tarp they throw over the spill. When it was Emily's turn to speak, she did not stand right away. She took a breath that lasted just long enough to make people quiet down without asking them, and then she lifted her glass and smiled in a way that made my shoulders unclench. Because it was not a smile for show, it was the kind of smile you wear when you know exactly what you are about to do, and she said she wanted to make a toast to the future, to partnership, to honesty, to the kind of family that tells the truth even when it is inconvenient, and the table hummed with approval like a machine that had just turned on. Then she looked straight down the line of faces, past Daniel and past Mom and past the phones held up like little trophies, and she said, very clearly and without theatrics, that she would like to thank someone here for telling her the truth. When she lifted her glass and thanked someone for telling her the truth, the room held its breath, and while the forks hovered and my mother's smile tightened, my mind slid backward to the week everything snapped into focus. The week I stopped pretending that Daniel's charm could outrun math, because math, unlike family stories, does not care how well you perform gratitude at holidays or how confidently you promise to do better next month. It started with a phone call I was not supposed to get, a polite woman from a credit union asking if Daniel still lived at my address, which he did not and had not for a long time. And the only reason they were calling me at all was because my name sat in a stack of references he had offered when he consolidated a mess of old balances that never really died. They just shapeshifted into new payment plans with fresh due dates and kinder interest for a few months, and I told her he did not live with me and that I could not speak for him, and I hung up with that small sick feeling that shows up when you know you have seen this pattern before and you know exactly where it ends. A day later I ran into Chelsea, who manages the jewelry store near my office and who has known me since we were the age for bad haircuts and study groups, and she asked lightly whether the engagement plans were still on track, which was a normal question until she added that the financing paperwork had finally been approved after a hiccup because the authorized user form had been returned with corrections, and while she did not say Emily's name, the way she glanced at me made it obvious there had been a signature that did not match the one on file, and I felt that same cold prickle of recognition because this was exactly the sort of shortcut Daniel took when a door did not open fast enough. The kind that starts with a white lie and ends with somebody else holding the bill. I did not confront him, and I did not run to my mother to plead for sanity, because I knew how those conversations go in our family, with the person who asks the hard question becoming the villain by the second minute, so I did something I could live with. Something clean and simple and almost boring in its fairness, which was to lay out the facts to Emily in a message so calm it read like a receipt, 3 lines and 2 attachments, and not a single insult, telling her that a credit union had called my phone about a consolidation and that a friend at a store had mentioned a correction on an authorized user form, and that while I could not swear to anything beyond my lane, she deserved to look at her own bank statements for unexplained authorizations and to request a copy of any account where her name appeared. She did not reply right away, and I took that silence as a good sign, because the smart ones go quiet when they are gathering proof, and in the days that followed she texted me twice, each time with a question that had the precision of someone who had already found answers, asking whether a transfer labeled as a house fund could be redirected to pay a private loan without the joint party being notified, and whether an authorized user form could be submitted without the user standing in the store, and I answered the way a grown woman answers another grown woman, with straightforward language and no coaching, because the last thing she needed was my outrage trying to dress itself up as guidance. By the time dinner rolled around, I knew she had met with her bank and I knew she had visited the store, because Chelsea sent a picture of a torn contract with the words "canceled" across the top and a note that said, "Emily is calm and scary and I like her." And, while part of me wanted to print that picture and frame it for the next time my mother accused me of being dramatic, I kept it to myself and let the evening arrive without a single warning shot, since the only way any of this would stick was if the truth walked in on its own legs and sat down at the table without me dragging it by the collar. So when Emily thanked someone for telling her the truth, and Daniel went rigid beside her while my mother speared a cherry like it had personally insulted her, I felt the quietest kind of relief, because the fuse I had lit with those 3 measured lines had traveled exactly where it needed to go, and as Emily set her glass down with that steady hand that tells you a decision has already been made, I saw her reach into her bag for a single folded paper, and I understood that whatever story she was about to tell would not ask for permission, because the proof was already in her hand and the room was about to meet it. Emily unfolded the paper with the same steady calm she brings to everything that matters to her, and while the table waited for a sweet little toast about love and plans and Pinterest boards, she started reading a simple timeline that did not need embellishment because it was built from dates and transfers and signatures, a list that showed a house fund quietly drained to cover a private loan, a jewelry contract canceled after a staff member compared an authorized user's signature against the sample on file and found it did not match, and a consolidation filed with a credit union that listed my name as a reference even though I had not been asked and would never have agreed. And with each fact, she let the room feel the weight of what had been done without her consent or knowledge. Daniel tried to jump in with that confident tone he uses when he is bluffing through a mess he believes he can outrun if he just stays charming long enough, saying something about misunderstandings and crossed wires and a manager who must be new. But Emily did not raise her voice or plead for anyone to believe her. She simply kept her eyes on the paper and then on him, and she asked one clean question that landed like a pin in a balloon, which was whether he had ever opened any account or moved any shared money without telling her, and when he said he had not, she read the exact transaction labels, and the exact dates, and the exact email confirmations, and the room heard how sure he sounded while the proof sat inches from his water glass. My mother leaned toward me like a prosecutor leaning toward a witness who might bolt, and she whispered that this was not the time for me to be smug, which would have been hilarious if it were not so tired, because I was not smiling. I was breathing slowly and keeping my hands folded and refusing to take the bait, since I had learned that the way you lose yourself in this family is by letting their panic draft you into the cleanup crew, and I had already decided I was not going to mop a single spill tonight, not with my words and not with my face, and certainly not by offering myself up as the scapegoat who could absorb Daniel's mess, while everyone else clapped for a speech about fresh beginnings. Emily thanked the person who had told her the truth, and before anyone could swivel their necks in unison to pin a medal or a target on me, she added that the person had not given an opinion or an accusation. Only facts and a reminder to check her own accounts, which was the subtle boundary line I needed the room to hear, because in this family the story always mutates into a melodrama about tone and timing while the real issue slides out the side door. And tonight I was not letting the issue escape. Not by talking over it and not by apologizing for a problem I did not create. Daniel kept pressing, saying this was all fixable, that the ring could be reissued, that the loan could be refinanced, that the house fund could be rebuilt, that everyone here knew he was under pressure at work and that he had wanted to spare her the stress. And I watched Emily listen without flinching, the way you listen when you have finally found the last piece of a puzzle and you do not need anyone to help you see the picture anymore. And when he finally asked who had poisoned her against him, she did not look at me. She looked at her paper again and then at my mother, and she said that deception does not need a narrator because the transactions speak in their own voice. The manager tried to deliver a celebratory cheesecake that had clearly been arranged for a very different script, and the timing would have been funny if it were not so awkward, so I did the smallest, cleanest thing I could do to keep the room honest, which was to catch the manager's sleeve and tell him, politely and clearly enough for the table to hear, that the dessert should be charged to Daniel's card because this was his treat, and while that gesture was not loud or cruel, it was a line in the sand, a refusal to subsidize the performance while the truth stood in plain sight, and it made Daniel flush in that way he does when a free ride has just been called to a stop. My mother started to say that families work things out in private and that airing details at dinner was uncalled for, and I finally turned my head and answered her with the same measured voice I had used in that message to Emily, telling her that privacy tends to be the favorite word of whoever benefits from silence, and that what we were looking at here was not gossip or drama, but a ledger of choices that had consequences for someone who had been asked to trust without inspection. And for once, she did not have a quick reply, because even she could see that the numbers did not care about family rankings or holiday photos. Emily folded the paper, set it beside her glass, and thanked everyone for listening, saying that she believed in commitment and in working through hard things when both people are honest and clear, and that she also believed in boundaries and in not building a future on top of holes someone else dug. And then, with the same calm that had carried her through the entire toast, she said that because the truth had finally arrived on time, she had made a decision about their future, and while the table went quiet in that fearful, anticipatory way that happens when a set of illusions is about to be retired, I sat very still and let the silence do what my voice no longer needed to do, because the decision was hers to speak and the justice was already in motion. Emily did not drag it out with theatrics or a speech about destiny or second chances. She simply set the folded paper beside her glass like a referee placing a rule book on the table and said, with a voice that was soft enough to be respectful and firm enough to be final, that she would not be marrying a man who moved shared money without consent, who signed her up for obligations she never agreed to, and who thought that a charming apology could outvote a trail of transactions, and in the Space after those words, you could feel the room calculate which story it wanted to tell about her, whether she was cruel for doing this in public or brave for refusing to be recruited into a future built on edits and omissions. Daniel tried to pivot the way he always does when cornered, reaching for that tone that sounds reasonable if you do not know the facts, saying that he had been under pressure and that he had meant to fix all of it before the engagement party because he wanted to start clean, and he even tried to pull the table into it by asking whether any of us had ever made mistakes. And you could almost hear the script he hoped we would read on cue about compassion and family and keeping private things private, but Emily did not blink. She told him she had met with her bank and the jewelry store, that she had spoken to a counselor about what trust actually looks like in real life, and that she had already moved her remaining savings into an account only she could access because she was done giving him blank checks written in faith. My mother took that as her cue to aim every ounce of disappointment at me, saying that I had poisoned a happy moment and that there are ways to help people that do not involve humiliating them at dinner. And I set my napkin down and answered as calmly as I could manage that I had not humiliated anyone, that I had sent 3 lines containing facts to a woman who deserved to read her own statements with both eyes open, and that if humiliation was happening in this room, it began the moment her son decided he could borrow trust like a sweater and return it whenever it was convenient, and because I knew where her next sentence would go, I added that calling an emergency honesty meeting in private would have only produced more performance and more promises, and that the only reason we were sitting inside the truth right now was because Emily refused to be coached into silence. Daniel turned to me with that flushed look he gets when he realizes the table is not buying what he is selling, and he accused me of jealousy and of trying to destroy something good because I could not stand to see him happy. And I told him that if happiness requires someone else's blindfold, then it is not happiness, it is theft with nicer lighting, and that while I did not owe him a single explanation, I would offer one courtesy to the group so we could retire the myth that I am the family arsonist, which is that I had also protected him from his own fallout by doing something he never once did for me. I had taken responsibility for my part, which in this case was the small unasked role he gave me when he listed me as a reference on a consolidation he knew might default. I explained, still in that measured tone that made my mother fold her arms like a judge hearing a verdict she does not like, that I had contacted the credit union, that I had provided documentation showing I did not live with him and had not co-signed for anything, that a fraud alert was placed so no one else could leverage my address, and that I had also submitted a notarized affidavit withdrawing my name from further contact, and then I looked at Emily and told her that in parallel I had helped her file the disputes that were hers to file and had watched her do it without flinching because she understood this was not about punishment. This was about not sponsoring a second season of the same show. The manager had been hovering with the bill like a nervous messenger, and in a gesture that was as quiet as it was decisive, I asked him to run the table on Daniel's card because this celebration had been arranged as his treat and because it was time for him to assume the cost of the story he had written. And when Daniel sputtered about limits and holds and the indignity of being singled out, Emily reached for her phone and, with that same calm that had become the pulse of the evening, said that she would be retrieving her share of the house fund through the bank's reversal since the transfers were unauthorized, and that if the card declined we could wait, because she was in no rush to subsidize his performance any longer. What I did next was not dramatic and it was not cruel, but it was the precise kind of justice I wish someone had modeled for me when I was younger and kept cleaning up after him, because I slid a slim envelope across the table to him and told him he could open it later, and inside that envelope sat a printout of the family loans he had promised to repay, converted into a simple demand with dates and amounts, and a note stating that if he declined to enter a payment plan by the close of the next business day I would file in small claims for the balance, and before my mother could gasp about how heartless that sounded, I added that the plan included a waiver of interest if he started now and stayed consistent, because I was not out to ruin him. I was out to stop pretending that he would fix himself without structure. Emily placed her ring box on the table and pushed it toward him like a receipt for a transaction she refused to complete. The manager returned with the handheld reader and Daniel finally unlocked his phone to move money around. And as he did, a notification flashed across the screen with a bright little banner that, even from 3 chairs away, we could not ignore. A bank alert announcing that a disputed transfer had been reversed, and that a hold had been placed on the account pending review. And, while he stared at it like it had betrayed him personally, the room fell into the kind of hush that only arrives when a story's ending has started to read itself aloud. And I leaned back without a word because the consequence was finally speaking in his language, and, for the first time all evening, he had run out of lines to deliver as the door to the private room opened and a figure stepped in with an envelope addressed to him. The man at the door turned out not to be a messenger from some dramatic outside force, but the restaurant manager returning with a plain white folio stamped with Daniel's first and last name in tidy block letters. A detail that would have been forgettable on any other night, but that now felt like a small stage direction from the universe. Because when he opened it and saw the declined authorization slip stapled to the itemized bill along with a handwritten note asking for an alternate form of payment, you could watch the performance drain out of his face and be replaced with the bare mechanical work of moving money around while everyone pretended to study their water glasses. Emily did not gloat, and neither did I, since triumph never looks good in a room where the truth is already doing the heavy lifting, and instead she asked the manager, with that calm that had carried her through every ugly minute, to rerun the charge after Daniel finished. Then she turned to him and explained in the same steady tone a nurse uses with a patient who keeps ignoring instructions that she had already shifted the last of her funds into a new account and had already filed a fraud report on the authorization he created at the jewelry store, and that starting tomorrow morning the apartment office would receive a change request for the lease along with a locksmith appointment, which sounded cold to my mother until Emily added that nothing about this was revenge for its own sake. It was the structure you build when trust is gone, and the only way to stop paying for someone else's promises is to pay for your own locks. My mother tried one more time to tug the room back toward the script she prefers, the one where family stays united and we give men who are sorry a long runway to become better versions of themselves. And she started to cry the way she always does when she wants everyone to look at the feeling instead of the facts, saying that Emily could have handled this privately and that I could have waited until the engagement was secure before bringing up concerns. And I told her as gently as I could that privacy is not the same as secrecy, and that waiting would not have made him honest. It would have only given him more time to move money from one pocket to another while we congratulated ourselves for being supportive. Daniel finally got a card to work after transferring from one account to another, and the slip printed with that little victorious chatter a machine makes when it gets what it wants, and he signed it with an angry flourish like the pen had barked at him, then shoved the folio back at the manager and said he would fix everything in the morning if everyone would just calm down, which made me think of every morning I have ever heard him promise a reset and how each one looked less like a plan and more like a snooze button. So I told him that the envelope I had given him earlier was not a threat and not a tantrum, it was a boundary with a clock, and that if he called me at any hour before the deadline to set a payment plan, I would pick up and we would walk through it like adults, but if he did not, I would file without 1 ounce of guilt. Emily stood then, not to make a scene but to mark an ending in a way that even my mother could not rewrite later. And she thanked the table for the years of holiday dinners and for the kind messages when her father passed and for the way we had once rallied to pack a moving truck in the rain, and she thanked whoever had sent her the simple, careful facts that allowed her to see her own life clearly, and she walked to my side and squeezed my hand without naming me, which made my mother look away. Because naming would have given her a target while this small, undeniable gesture gave her nothing to swing at, and Emily left the ring box on the table like a final invoice and said she would send for her remaining things, and that there would be no argument about who kept what because she was done bargaining with people who treated honesty like a coupon you redeem only when it is convenient. What happened in the days after that dinner did not feel like a victory lap so much as a long overdue return to sane gravity. Because once the photos stopped buzzing on the family thread and once my mother ran out of ways to ask whether I could help patch things quietly, the story began to breathe in a shape that made sense. with Emily updating me just once to say the reversals were approved and the store had flagged the signature discrepancy in their internal system, and with Daniel sending a curt message before the deadline agreeing to the payment plan because he had discovered what adulthood always teaches you when you finally run out of charm, which is that people who are done being your safety net are not angry so much as finished. On the morning the first payment cleared, I walked to the coffee shop near my office and sat with the receipt like it was a small contract between the person I had been and the person I wanted to keep being, the one who does not scream, but does not flinch either, who does not confuse endurance with love, and who does not carry other people's consequences just because she has broad shoulders. And I thought about how often girls are told that keeping the peace is a noble calling when, in practice, keeping the peace sometimes means making sure a liar pays for the dessert he ordered during the speech he planned to give about his future. And I wished I could mail that single lesson back in time to my younger self who kept smoothing every wrinkle while the fabric slowly disappeared from her hands. My mother has not apologized, and I do not expect her to, though she has softened her texts into careful neutral lines about taking care of myself and coming by for dinner if I feel up to it. And while there is a part of me that still aches to be seen in the way she sees him, I have decided that being seen by myself and by the people who earn it is a better prize than any family performance. So I keep moving forward with a kind of quiet that is not silence, but clarity, the kind that refuses to carry what is not mine and refuses to be recruited into one more cleanup crew. If you are hoping for a grand finale where I explode or he breaks down or my mother suddenly becomes the version of a parent she never learned how to be, I do not have that for you. What I have is better because it is real. A final move that required no fireworks, only patience and a refusal to edit the facts into something more comfortable. And it sounds like this when I say it out loud without shaking, that I did not ruin his big night. I simply stopped volunteering to hold the curtain while he lied, and when the curtain fell on its own weight, the truth stood there on the stage exactly as it was, and for once, it was enough.